A lot of the Beach Boys scholars look at the Beach Boys today as like the real precursor to Pet Sounds and where Brian was headed. What's your feeling on that? I mean, when did you first start to really see a change?
There's a very dark track that I never liked that was probably the example, and that would be in the back of my mind on the Beach Boys Today album.
Right.
To me, that's like a jumble. It's kind of something Bruce here, not Brian, I probably wouldn't have put in the album.
Welcome to another episode of Discograffiti's wildly in-depth Beach Boys series and Your Dreams Come True, where Brian Wilson freaks like you and me get our chance to delve deep into the barely believable history and prodigious discography of my favorite band of all time, and also coincidentally the best, along with a slew of over 50 top-shelf guests, ranging from musicians inspired by their work, family members, documentary directors, songwriting collaborators, Beach Boys authors, producers, touring band members, and for good measure, some of the Beach Boys themselves. I'm your host, Dave Gebroe, and special thanks goes out to co-producers Chuck Granata, Dennis Dykin, and Mark Freed, without whom this series would not have happened. And in this episode, we'll be turning our spray cans on the Beach Boys' Pet Sounds. Welcome to the Chuck Granata interview series, a very special collection of conversations about the Beach Boys' Pet Sounds that have never before seen the light of day. In the early 2000s, my friend Chuck Granata conducted a series of telephone interviews with members of the Beach Boys, studio musicians, family members, historians, authors, experts, and more, recording it all on minidisc and pulling quotes that ultimately wound up in his incredible book, Wouldn't It Be Nice? Brian Wilson and the Making of the Beach Boys' Pet Sounds. The minidiscs with the interviews were then all labeled, boxed up, and packed away. That is, until now. Chuck has done a bit of audio sprucing where needed, and I've trimmed them down for broadcast, but otherwise, this act of loving curation is brought to you as an act of historical TLC. Of course, I can't possibly thank Chuck Granata enough, and you should definitely pick up his book if you haven't already. The next entry in the Chuck Granata Pet Sounds interview series is part 2 of Chuck's chat with Beach Boy Bruce Johnston. By now, Bruce has retired from being interviewed, so this epic Unheard 2001 interview for Chuck Granata's Pet Sounds book is absolutely priceless, especially seeing as his fanboy love for Chuck's Sinatra book wound up contributing to a level of unvarnished honesty that's super rare in the Beach Boy universe. Here's just a few of the many things that Bruce discusses in this podcast. Brian's blender and the stew of his early influences, the differences between Brian and Phil Spector's approaches, Capitol Records' sabotage of Pet Sounds, Bruce's efforts in igniting a groundswell of interest in the UK upon Pet Sounds' release, and the difficulty of nailing the vocal parts that Brian had in mind. Here it is then, Bruce Johnston.
You've got to look at the Beach Boys during Pet Sounds as guys that were on the road, and I'm in the band because Brian obviously needed to, you only have 100% of your time, and you can't put it in 3 places at once. So he was smart enough to get off the road and keep, the thing that really kept getting the band on the radio going, and somehow growing up so quickly musically and having budgets because of the simple stuff to finance the complicated stuff.
Right.
So there you have Pet Sounds, but you don't have the band necessarily around in the beginning of those tracking sessions. You have us all catching up to it, and you have probably the label and some of the guys politically a little nervous because it doesn't sound like the formula that's gone through the ceiling, And then you have those of us that probably weren't political enough to realize anything other than Brian was doing groundbreaking pop music. I wasn't thinking about who was writing what words. I kind of assumed Mike was probably writing more than I thought because he's got, co-writing on 3 of the songs. But you also have Mike changing Hang On to Your Ego to I Know There's an Answer, because in the drug world with LSD, Brian apparently, according to Mike, and I'm kind of a square, so, I might not know, apparently in those times, because there was such a drastic change by the chemicals, you were supposed to hang on to your ego. And I don't think Mike wanted any connection from the Beach Boys to drugs at that point, and probably prevailed in terms of Brian using the I Know There's an Answer, kind of lightening it up.
Right, which is a great move, actually.
Well, yeah, it really was. And this is like about Pet Sounds, but not about Pet Sounds. I would say, I came in and I did this album called Summer Days and Summer Nights. So the first song I sang on was California Girls. So here I am, not even a Beach Boy, but wearing a striped shirt on stage, waltzing into these sessions, and Brian says, sing. I'm like, okay. So I am on the road. I get along with everybody. I'm able to kind of be Brian for a while in terms of the high parts. And I'm singing on these recordings, and he's not having me sing his parts, he's making an extra part. Okay, the thing that really astounded me was in the middle of the summer, Al Jardine gave Brian this great idea to take Sloop John B and turn it into a Beach Boys song. Well, when Brian played me the track, it was so different from all the other tracks, and it was never intended to go into Pet Sounds. It was just something he recorded,
right.
Period. But that's when I really realized that Brian had as much growth in him as he ever wanted to chase. And then he just totally eclipsed that with, and later, and just by months, the Pet Sound stuff he did.
Did Brian tell you that, how did you know that Sloop John B was not meant for Pet Sounds? Because that's something
I think only because it was recorded so close to the end of, it was pre-Pet Sounds. I don't think he was quite in the Pet Sounds mode
right
at that point.
Right.
I would say that the people around him probably forced it in the album.
Kind of as like the thing that would be the single that would make the record more successful, right?
Well, you kind of like if Queen Elizabeth was a young girl now and they were having problems with the royals and they wanted to kind of, do something radical and really sell the country as being young and hip, they might have her in a wet T-shirt contest.
Right. A lot of the Beach Boys scholars look at the Beach Boys today as like the real precursor to Pet Sounds and where Brian was headed. What's your feeling on that? When did you first start to really see a change?
There's a very dark track that I never liked that was probably the example, and that would be in the back of my mind on the Beach Boys Today album.
Right.
To me, that's like a jumble. It's kind of something I probably, Bruce here, not Brian, I probably wouldn't have put in the album. But obviously, it's like having all the parts of a sum kind of laid out on the floor. And that's probably the first step of putting something together beyond a formula that was enriched from surfing through California Girls, really enriched, but still in the great formula. It just got more color to it and wider screen and fabulous, but slid in over on the left side of the stage, so to speak, is this in the back of my mind, that has that complication and sophistication that he would put in the Pet Sounds.
All right, that concludes your free sneak peek into today's Patreon episode. If you want to hear the rest of it, just visit patreon.com/discograffiti and either purchase this podcast by itself for $4, or better yet, subscribe at the major tier and get access to Discograffiti's 4 weekly episodes. That's Friday's free episode, the Sunday Discograffiti Soldiers of Sound episode, which showcases Patreon members and the Elephant Six world, your Monday bonus episode, and your Wednesday early release, ad-free, super extended director's cut of that Friday's show. Please keep in mind this is entirely how I support my wife and 6-year-old son, so don't risk feeling badly about yourself by not supporting Discograffiti. Become a member so you don't miss a single thing at patreon.com/discograffiti.